Next, please welcome to the stage the principal and leader of SGH Fire Engineering Practice, David Jacoby.
I think it's still morning, so good morning, everybody. Full disclosure, Kate and I used to work together, so she came up and said, hey, can we make basement apartments safe? And I'm a fire protection engineer. I work mostly with designers and building owners, and I said, of course you can. But she said, are you sure? And can you provide some more information about that? So I said, well, what are our initial concerns? So I'm also a volunteer firefighter, so I took both approaches here. I said, everybody here knows that egress and access is a concern in a basement. It tends to be very limited. Everybody figured that out pretty quickly. Any place we have people living, we have cooking, we have sleeping. Those are two other significant life safety threats. And then the chief hit upon this before. I have it listed as storage, but it's what goes on down in this space. You tend to have storage, you tend to have mechanical plant down there. That tends to raise the risk of what's going on in this area. From a firefighting standpoint, you're now talking about going down, and smoke and hot gases wants to go up. So now you're setting your operations up, and you're having to proceed down through what's going on. You have concerns about structural stability. You're now setting up your operations on top of the fire and trying to go down into it. We talked about carbon monoxide and keeping the buildings tighter. That is definitely a concern as well. And you know, if you think about where you're going to have tight construction, a basement tends to have tight construction compared to other areas. And the last thing is, you know, the actual configuration of the space. There was some conversation earlier this morning about ceiling heights and the fact that basements tend to have lower ceiling heights. So, you know, that gives us a smaller space for the smoke and hot gases to accumulate in, and it also provides difficulties for, you know, getting things in and out of the space. So all these things add to the risk that for basement fires. So I took a step back and said, okay, well, what is our actual risk? All the statistics that I'm about to give you are either from the U.S. Fire Administration or from NFPA, and both of those sources are going to go back to what's called the National Fire Incident Reporting System, or NFIRS. So we heard a stat in the introduction from 2015. I have a slightly updated one from 2017, which are the last stats that are available. And you can see there's about 1.3 million fires in a year. It's one every 24 seconds. Of those, about 500,000 are in homes in some form of structures. That's 72%. We have about 3,400, and this number has been holding steady for the last decade or so. It's about 3,600 people die a year in fires, and that's across all different kinds of fires. But of that 3,400, roughly 3/4 are dying in homes. So this is where we are killing people, is in our homes. So there's definitely something to keep an eye on going through here. Looking at the data, you know, what do we see for 1- and 2-family homes? So this is what you're looking at here is the number of fires. Let's say it's about 300,000. But this number right here, here's your fire deaths. As you can see over this is roughly a decade of data. It's been holding pretty steady. If I went back to 1973, and 1973 is a big date in fire because there was a report commissioned by the U.S. government called the U.S. Burning. At that time, we were killing about 13,000 people in fires. So if I look back, that number would be way up here, and so it's come down, and we're doing a good job. So everything I'm saying here, if you put it into perspective, we're doing a good job. We've done a lot of good things with fire alarms, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sprinklers. But this number's been pretty persistent. This is, you know, for the last 10 years, even if you went back about 15, 20 years, it's going to be in this ballpark. Associated with that, we have 1- and 2-family. So this is all residential. 1- and 2-family, it's about 2,200. So, you know, it's 2,700 in residential out of the 3,400. Most of them are in residential. Most of those are in 1- and 2-family homes. When Kate asked me to talk about this, she said that a majority of what we're talking about is 1- and 2-family homes. Some of them might be in larger buildings. Looking at the larger buildings, looking at multifamily residences, you can see the number is much smaller, about 400 people. Now, there's a couple of things at play here. One is the total number of single families versus the total number of multifamilies. One data point that I saw from the last census was that there's roughly 80 million single-family homes, and there's roughly 20 million multifamily homes. That's the actual numbers of buildings in the country. So obviously, this is not normalized for how many there are, but you can see the multifamily home is significantly less than the single-family home. So why is that? One is the number of homes that are out there, but also multifamily homes have higher regulations. You tend to have more compartmentation. You tend to have more egress. We have usually a corridor, usually exits at either end of the corridor, especially outside of New York City where the exits are not all in the core. Sprinklers are mandated in multifamily residences. Fire alarm systems, actual fire alarm systems as opposed to the smoke alarm that you have in your unit that has a battery in it. So you're on top of getting local notification, the fire department is getting notified at the same time. So response times are shorter. And then, like I said, the egress. So we can look at the multifamily experience and say, well, what can we apply going forward? Fire Administration also put out this last report. It's 2010 to 2012, looking specifically at basement fires, occupied basement fires. And interestingly, it's a very small percentage of all the fires, 3%. But we have 65% of the deaths, 65 deaths in there, which is about 2%. So the number of deaths correspond to the number of fires. Interestingly, they talk about electrical malfunctioning, heating, appliances. These are the major causes of events. So we wanted to dig a little bit further into, okay, how do we make these places safe? We want to address the actual issues that are happening here. So through the data, again, we can look at what are the typical causes of fires. And if I was presenting this probably about 15 years ago, people would have said smoking, and you would have been right. Smoking is still a high percentage, but you can see here, cooking is the single largest ignition source for fires in residential buildings. So it's roughly 50%. Then heating, to the chief's point about the heating plants, that's still a very high percentage. Electrical appliance, if you lump the heating and electrical together, it comes close to the cooking, and then smoking is down low. However, when we look at the deaths in residential buildings, smoking is the #1 ignition source. And anecdotally, the simple answer for that is still people smoking in bed. So they're sitting there, they fall asleep, cigarette ignites the bed that they're in, leading to a fatality. So how do we address these issues? Looking at the equipment that's going on, a large portion of these failures are electrical, and they're related to the equipment that's in the space. So clearly that's something that we should be taking a look at as we try to legalize these apartments. The chief brought up the old hulking plant that's in there. Associated with that is the old wiring and the old electrical distribution. These are things that we should be looking at. Putting in sprinklers, probably the single best thing we can do that addresses the most of these issues. If we do have a fire, having a sprinkler system will control it, if not put it out. So we want to look at putting sprinklers in, having the smoke detection, probably more so looking at, alarms with notification. We want to look at the egress. We talked about it at the beginning of the morning. Egress, there's lots of ways we can do it, but providing, 2 means of egress from these spaces is actually pretty important. And egress is also going to be access. Now, some of this, I started off by saying, the fire department's is going to set up operations above and work down. Giving them ways to get in, different ways to get in is important so that they can get down to the seat of the fire and put it out. Obviously, if we have a sprinkler system, that's going to help them as well. Statistic that's out by this is from the Home Sprinkler Coalition, but it's actually based on the NFIRS data, that your risk of dying in a building is reduced by 82% if there's sprinklers in that building. And just to reinforce that, if you can hit play on this. This is a video put out by the Home Sprinkler Coalition. It is a test of that's the fire alarm on the video, not in the building. There is a fire smoke detector right there. See the sprinkler right there. Bottom is without a sprinkler. The top is with a sprinkler. Now you've got the smoke flare coming down, descending down. Yes, it's smoky here, but you're also, the camera's wet. So part of your obscuration that you're seeing here is because the camera's actually getting wet. So you can see the fire is continuing to extend, involving more exposure. Eventually what you're going to get is flashover where everything ignites outside. Fire breaking the window. Everything in the room has ignited at this point. Clearly untenable conditions. It's going to take a shot right at the end here. And this is after. So
That was
with
a
the
minute,
sprinkler-
20 seconds, right?
Yes,
Minute.
and that was real time, yeah. So, obviously this is longer than that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there's lots of studies out there right now. UL has a firefighter safety initiative, and they're looking at differences in fuel loads from, say the 1970s versus today. And they have a statistic out there saying that back, in the 1970s, you had between 12 and 17 minutes to get out of a house in a fire. And they're now saying that with the new fuel, the new materials in the building, it's down to about 5 minutes from the time it ignites to the time to get out. So again, your sprinkler system is that much more important to address these fuels. So kind of circling back around, is there a way to make it safe? Yes. We need to address the risks that are down there. We have mechanical equipment, we have storage, we need to address those. That can be done with a combination of compartmentation and providing sprinklers. We want to provide notification so that people get out in a timely fashion, and we want to give them ways to get out of the building. So yes, we can make it safe, but it will require probably upgrades to the existing stock.
Okay, I have a question. So I saw did you see the presentation from the gentleman from England with the light wells?
Yep.
So, and also in that series were other windows described as egress windows that I thought were too high to crawl up into. Okay, so when you have a typical egress window, it's normally on a vertical wall in New York City, since the window has to be about 7 feet from the ceiling, and it's 12 feet wide in area. The thing comes down 2-3 feet, and you're exiting 3-4 feet off the ground sideways, and the heat and hot gases are collecting at the top.
Yep.
And when you go out sideways to an open air environment, there's no gas around you. It dissipates, and you can flee. Some of these escape routes were basically chutes going up a ladder, and I want to hear your feeling on whether those are really suitable, because when I think about it, and I'm not a fire engineer, you'd think that you'd have the fire racing you up, and you can't get out. How does that work?
Yeah, and you are correct. As I said, smoke and hot gases wants to rise. So if we give it a path to rise, it's going to go that route. Using the IRC as a reference point, they want that window to be no more than 36 inches off the ground. There's two reasons for that. One is where the smoke and hot gases are. The other reason is so that somebody can use it. So you don't need a ladder to get up to it.
But let's say you go up and then you're in a little well.
Right, and so exactly. So that's what you end up seeing is they put a well in, and then there's a ladder out there. And yes, if you open that window, there will be smoke coming out there. One, by having the detection, hopefully you're getting out before the conditions are really that bad. Two, like you said, once it gets outside, it is going to dissipate. Depending on what the depth of that well is, you could still be in the smoke. Generally, for a short distance, you're going to be able to, hopefully climb out and get out. My take on it would be that one of our exits would be what I'm going to say a legitimate exit, a stair that is enclosed, separated from above, whatever, however you want to provide that separation. so that you would have at least one exit that is, normal. The second exit being potentially an escape window.
Another question then. The statistics that you showed like 3% of the fires were in basements. Do you think that number seems low to me? I'm wondering if you would agree with me that that's probably because in most parts of the country, people don't sleep in basements. People don't have those cigarettes down there because no one's living down there. In certain concentrated urban environments, New York City is one of them, but we have lots of them in this country, there are places where people do live in basements, and probably if you were to somehow adjust those figures for where people live in basements more often, you'd see a different number.
I agree. Yes, you would see a different number. I can't put a number to it. The other factor in there is, in general, the difference between single 1- and 2-family homes and multifamily homes. Like I said, is multifamily homes tend to have system smoke detection that are providing notification, whereas in a 1- and 2-family home, you might have the smoke alarm but not actual notification, and so smaller fires are not getting reported.
I see.
So is that number low? Probably. How low, I don't know.
Just one question. What do you think about maybe a 6'9" or a 7-foot ceiling? What's your thought?
Let's say human factors aside.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to living in it.
Yeah, right.
From a fire safety.
From a fire safety standpoint, obviously, the lower the ceiling, the more exposed, the quicker the smoke layer is going to come down, the less time you have. So, is there a big difference between 6'9" and 7? Well, it depends on how big the space is. I mean, if it's a big open basement and I have a 3-inch difference, the time difference from when that smoke layer is going to come down is not going to be significant. If it's a smaller space, if it's just the bedroom, you're talking about, you might be talking about, 10, 15, 30 seconds of difference of when that smoke layer is coming down.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the larger the room, the less that means. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Full disclosure, I brought my little bag with me. I had my NFPA reports that actually you're using and the UL report, and I just wanted to be able to hand them to you if you were presenting stuff that was...
Well, I'm happy that I presented good stuff for you.
Factual as reported. And the fire department's not against basements. This is a place of public assembly, and it's below grade. So, I'm here, I don't feel uncomfortable or anything. But, and I will say this, also just one last background is I spent about half my career in the types of neighborhoods that are being targeted for the basement occupancy proposal, and a quarter of my career in that exact neighborhood in East New York. So I'm pretty aware of what's going on and what's at stake. I'm just going to throw a couple of things at you. My own risk assessment of basements, and maybe you could comment. In general, and I was talking with the council member, when you look at code and how you manage a city through time, we have, if a building gets demolished or it gets a major renovation or a change in occupancy, that's a chance for the next building to come up to more modern standards. And so we deal in New York with buildings that are 110 years old, and we have very nice new buildings like this. So there is some concern that we want to keep marching our building stock forward, and when we apply these kind of quicker fixes, we do lose some of that option and leverage. But the fire department is aware that regulation is a tricky game. We can't demand full compliance and then people just go off the grid. Maybe there's some consideration for providing a pathway to making things safer. When looking at it from a risk analysis, the heating plant and the utilities, big concern. I have tremendous practical experience in that area. CO enters the building, in neighborhoods that have subsurface electric, which is not generally East New York, but other neighborhoods. Sewer gases, that equipment goes awry, creates CO, creates smoke. The heating plant, and I think those numbers, if you looked, It's twice for private dwellings, heating plant. A lot of that was fireplaces, so that doesn't apply here. But also nationally, they're not dealing with the winters that we have here, so heating plant might have more effect in New York City. So looking at the proposal in the code, it says, hey, prescribe with the law. So the law says real nice, discrete, separate compartmentation, but that actually has to happen. So that sheetrock's got to be good and taped and spackled and a good ceiling and a good door. So yeah, you were right. You said, oh yeah, we can make them safe, properly engineered, properly designed, properly installed, properly maintained. We do lose an edge there. We do not inspect these buildings day after day, year after year, nor could we, right? So that's a difference in other spaces. Also, what John Rockwell spoke about with the air management, that's another concern. So if you come in and you make the space really tight, you put in sprinklers and you put in your, smoke detection, did you design that heating plant that it's getting good air? So we talked about that. One of the problems I see also is we know that smoke detectors are, that's a fantastic invention, and that's a bona fide, like we have the stats on that, and CO detectors. But when you deal with small spaces, it's very difficult to put the right detector in the right space, right? So you want this detector outside your bedroom so it learns about the hazard early and wakes you up. But if your kitchen or other heating plant or something's right there, you begin to get nuisance alarms and disconnect it, or we come a lot if it's central's tie-in, and then we're going to write you a violation for unwarranted and unnecessary alarm. So we got to get the right detectors for those small spaces that can be problematic. And then just below grade spaces in general is difficult because anyone who's sick or at risk from fire or something like that, we have to get them up and out. And it's very, very difficult to get anybody anywhere. And then in that effort, firefighters sometimes will bite off more than we can chew, and we have very low probability of getting the firefighter up and out. We have very good stats on high proportion of maydays, which are near-miss events, and also firefighter deaths in basements. So as you did address, we have to go through that stratified space up top where it's real hot and get down there. There's no quick exit to fresh air. We've got to go back through that space. And for people before we get there, it's going to be unlikely that you're going to be able to get out of there. So I think we can address the egress problems with, good, but we'll have to look building by building, and but it's still going to be a problem. So big thing for me, heating plant, building mechanics, living intimately with that is problematic. And then how do you alarm these spaces if they're small spaces so that you don't get nuisance alarm? The alarm is still working. And then we still have the problem with trying to evac people up and out. So.
Thank you,
Yeah.
David.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I know.